Peace, love, and law. For the next few minutes, I'll be talking about negotiable instruments, primarily fiat paper money. How does the government acquire these paper money? What relationship does it have with the central bank? Who owns the central bank? What exactly does the government borrow from the central bank, and how does it pay for it? And who's funding the whole operation? So let's start off with the paper money, right? So the paper money is basically this right here. Let me see. So you got this, right? So now let's look at this piece of paper money, how it was used back in the days. Let's say 1922, paper money was backed by something called substance, either gold or silver. And most paper currencies functioned as promissory notes. It's kind of like a legal IOU from the central bank or the treasury. Now, how it worked is basically the government held the reserves of gold, and paper money was issued in amounts that corresponds to the gold held in reserve. So if the government was holding on to X amount of gold, there's only going to be the equivalent amount of the representation of it, which is the promissory note. So basically a $20 bill in 1922 per se, right, might have said something on the paper, might have said something like, this certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America or some country $20 in gold payable to the bearer on demand. So back in the days, if you had a 20 or a 50 like this, it was redeemable in gold, right? So that was a gold certificate. Now in British Empire and colonies, like right here in Belize, which was previously British Honduras, it was the pound. Pound sterling was still linked to the gold standard. So through the suspension of that pound sterling back in World War II, it was partially restored after, but many colonial currencies were pegged to sterling and indirectly linked to gold. So silver coinage was often used in circulation, and some colonial notes may have been redeemable in silver. So it's interesting to understand that colonial notes, meaning colonial banknotes, for example, if you look at the Belize birth certificate, at the bottom of the Belize birth certificate, in very, very small letters, at the very bottom left, it says colonial bank note. It's very interesting to see that. Now, let's look at the legal and equitable implications of all of this paper money, right? This system had contractual and equitable principles baked into it. So paper currency equals a promise to pay, and it is a type of negotiable instrument. And the holder in due course of that note has the legal right to demand payment of gold or silver that was backed by this paper money back in the days. So the backing assets, which was gold and silver, was the consideration for the note's face value. So I want you to hear the word consideration. Now, consideration usually is given to someone who is offering, who's also offering value. We often think that gold and silver is the value, but it's actually the consideration. Value is the labor. So we are the ones who are giving labor for these. We're the ones that they have to convince to accept this for our time and energy. Right now it seems it's the other way around. We're begging for this for our labor, but it's actually at the beginning, when this used to be gold and silver, and it no longer had gold and silver backing it and is nothing. How do you convince a population to still work for this, even though this was backed by nothing? How do you do that? Convincing a population to work for this, or to exchange their labor for this, if this was something you could redeem in actual gold and silver, that would be a bit more easier, I would assume, than to convince a population to exchange their labor for this that has no value. Right? So it's a very interesting thing to think about. Now, so what changed, right? So the gold redemption feature, the feature was gradually dismantled. The U.S. suspended gold and the U.S. suspended gold and back in 1933, and it was fully international convertibility ended in 1971 through the Nixon shock. Now, today's paper money is fiat, so called fiat, and it's not backed by gold. It's redeemable only in itself for credits. So what has happened? Right? What has happened? This used to have value, now it doesn't. But why are we accepting it as if it has value? Well, we're the ones who are giving value now. This is just consideration. So because we're giving the value for this, we are giving the value in exchange for this. We are the creditors. All right? So what does this mean? Okay, so the fiat currency as a legal promise, right, is created by the Central Bank Act and the Government Finance and Audit Act, right? And this comes into existence because of statutes. So essentially, this is a promise to pay, and it is a few things. Well, whoever's holding it, the bank is promising to pay the bearer credits, nothing else but credits. But you see, the government borrows this from the bank, from the central bank. The government says, hey, I want to borrow some of these paper monies right here, fiat. And the bank says, okay, sure. Okay, no problem, let's do it. I'll lend you this and you give me an interest. So the government has to pay for this and give an interest. How does it do that? That's another interesting way. So many governments, what they do is they do borrow from their central banks, right? And central banks, while legally public institutions, often operate independently and are governed under private style framework, corporate structures, and profit-seeking behaviors. Government itself is often incorporated as a legal fiction. It is a non-living entity that can enter into contracts, can sue and be sued, and operate financially just like a corporation. So is the bank privately owned, though? A lot of us believe that it is privately owned, but what is happening is that the bank is actually owned by the state when you look it up. But who's the state? Well, when you look at who's the state, the crown is basically the authority, that representation of that authority of the state. So it's basically the crown. And if you look at the Tax Act, well, the which one is it? The Administration and Procedure of Tax. The Tax Administration and Procedure Act, that's what it is. It basically says that all taxes that are collected and are payable are due to the crown, to the Director General. So it's very clear that the government is a body of trustee that represents the crown, and then the bank is also owned by the state, which is the crown, which is very interesting. So if the central bank is the creator, right, and the government is the borrower, let's say the central bank creates this and the government, this is government, this is the central bank. The central bank creates this, the government borrows it, and then the people give their labor for this in exchange for this. So the government is basically borrowing, but it requires an undersigner, because the government has no value, has no gold, no silver. So you say, but yeah, it has rights to the land, has rights to many things. Well, everything in the land is given value by the labor of man. So the labor is the value. There is nothing else that has more value than labor. Nothing. You can't get anything without labor. How are you going to get anything? You can't build anything without labor. You can't extract any minerals from the ground without labor. You can't refine anything. You can't anything can be done, nothing man-made without labor. Labor is the gold. So gold, we are the ones providing labor. value, and the government is giving consideration. That is that's what makes man beneficial owner of the rights to the fruit of his labor. Isn't that interesting? So we'll talk more on this on the next video. I just wanted to do a quick little 10-minute video. Anyway, peace, love, and law. Hope you think about it.